to begin our conversation, before we get super deep into some of the frameworks and things that we wanted to dive into, I was wondering if you could tell us first, like, first off, what is the product trio? And then I'd love to learn, like, where does your passion for this particular topic or space come from?
Yeah. So talking about the product trio, and maybe I'll start the other way around. I'll talk about like the passion of, why I feel this is so important, and then I'll go into the product trio. I feel context of the problem space is something that a lot of product managers and a lot of product and engineering leaders seem to miss. Our entire reason for existence is to solution and to find solutions to problems. So the minute we get a problem from any which way, our natural inclination is to immediately jump into a solution and start figuring that out. And what I realized and why I'm so passionate about the product trio is if you have not framed the problem correctly, no solution on this planet can be the correct solution. um, Einstein once said that if I had, 1 hour, I would spend 99% on the problem and 1% on the solution. That's really correct because you need to contextualize the problem, contextualize the frame of reference, contextualize what audience you're building it for, and basically the validity of the problem in itself. Every problem is not a fire, and every problem doesn't have to be solved right now. So, the context around the problem space is something that isn't talked about enough. We, as product engineering and tech leaders, our entire job, and that's what is kind of like projected in every way, shape, or form, is your job is the solution for things. Like, here's a problem, go find a solution. So that's where I think the passion comes from, where a lot of the times I feel we're set up for failure because of like all of this subliminal messaging in organizations talking about you need to find a solution. Well, is the problem relevant? Should I even, like, the first question is, should I even find a solution? Does this problem deserve a solutioning? So that's kind of, I think, where this irreverent passion essentially comes from. And the product trio is essentially a way for getting multiple points of view at the same time. You have a designer, you have an engineer, and you have somebody as a product manager, like somebody in the product space that essentially contribute towards the product trio. And the reason for this is, um, as an example, if somebody talks about, hey, every time, like for example, for Netflix or Hulu, they say, hey, every time I search for the horror genre, I can't find anything that I like. The engineer will start thinking about querying. Are we getting the right material? Do we have the stuff in our database? That's his or her point of view. The designer will start thinking about, do they even know how to find it? They'll start thinking about, is the search bar appropriate? Are they able to like even like look for the right thing? And the product manager might start thinking about, do we have enough of this content? Are our relationships good enough to be able to get the right kind of content that this user wants? What is the demographic of this user? So you're essentially contributing multiple people to the same problem, and nobody will look at the solution the same way. So essentially, you're really enriching the opportunity space around that problem.
I think highlighting that last point is, for me, clarifies a lot of why it's so important to have those 3 points of view collaborating together so closely. Before we dive in a little bit deeper, how did your curiosity around how to optimize or ensure these relationships are working in sync in the most effective way, how did that happen for you? What's the origin story behind, like, your interest and your passion and your curiosity around that space?
Very short answer of that is like falling on my face, like multiple. It's, if you're the only one as a product manager who is tasked with solutioning,
Mhm.
you can never find the right solution. And I've seen that time and time again. And that could be in the way of, let's just say I had a user interview and I came up with a solution. I showed this to, if it's an assembly line, let's say I show it to my designer, the designer would think about it completely differently. And in fact, a lot of the times completely invalidate my idea. And I go like, this is a waste of time. Or then if the designer and I collaborate and then I show the idea to my engineer, like in a like an assembly line, they'll probably like say, "This is not even feasible. What are you thinking? Like, you're telling me to press a button and the rocket goes into space at NASA. Like that's not possible." So there was like so much of it. The idea of making it frictionless started with friction, and essentially failing multiple times on trying to find a solution and not being able to find the optimal solution.
Mhm.
The other reason why I think it became so valuable was no matter what you do alone cannot it won't impact the long-term business north star metric. Your goal is not to release a feature. Your goal is to improve DAUs. Your goal is to increase stickiness, or your goal is to increase partner revenue. Like the goal is not just to get that feature out the door. And I think not having the collaboration of the three essentially pillars that would make that happen, it can never work.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing to reduce that friction is number one, we're all in the same page. It is not product, design, and engineering. The department is PD and E. Like we're all in the same boat, going towards the same, destination. It's the same goal. And we all just need to collaborate. So we don't call ourselves as like product division, the design division. We call ourselves as PD&E. My VP of engineering, Justin, is like my complete, he's the partner in crime. Like I think the leaders have to be completely aligned and not have friction. And that's not an easy thing either, because everyone's looking out for their own teams. So trying to find middle paths, being extremely collaborative even when you don't want to be, is extremely important. And talking about what the biggest thing. So I keep talking about this thing that I read, that you can be three kinds of companies. You can be they're called the innovator, which is like a Tesla. They're like, I don't care what the users think, take it or leave it. If for the Tesla car or whatever. Then there's like a mechanic, which is, I would kind of think like Salesforce. They understand the problem of the user, but they don't take solutions. And the third is called the mother, which is like whatever the user, says goes. And the biggest thing that I kept falling into is when you don't have the trio in place, the product manager always kind of starts going towards the mother aspect, that whatever the user says goes, because there's no force that's balancing out the product manager, because the product manager is the only person who's aware of the business metrics, which is most commonly revenue. So the pressure of, if I say no to this customer for this feature, sales is going to lose revenue, or we may not get this new prospect, or this customer might churn, is such a huge pressure that the product vertical alone takes the brunt of, without like the engineer going like, this is not possible, this is going to break four other features, or we're diverging from the roadmap, or the designer saying you're like breaking the entire vision of like what we're thinking about. So that's what I started seeing with myself. We had a customer that was a huge Fortune 50 customer. And unfortunately, we started barreling down the route of whatever you say we'll do, because it was our 80% of our revenue came from that customer. There was so much pressure to be able to manage. And then when we had a pivot in the middle and we moved to Involve AI, I learned because I had my ML team as a part of the product trio, and we had my app team and a designer. So it became a quad at that point. And we had another customer similar to that, that was, again, a huge part of our revenue. But they were pushing us towards something that we didn't want to be, like completely changing our product vision. And we actually went ahead and said, we're going to fire this customer. I know this doesn't make sense, but this is, the long term losses are not worth the short term gain. So, kind of learned from that.